Welcome to this explainer. Today we are diving straight into the fascinating mechanics of human and animal behavior. We're going to explore one of the most powerful, absolutely game-changing psychological frameworks ever developed for understanding why we do the things we do. It's a system that strips away the mystery of our actions and replaces it with predictable, observable science. Okay, let's jump right in by picturing a familiar scenario. Imagine a student, our consistent, hardworking student, submitting her homework exactly on time. Her teacher smiles and gives her some genuine, enthusiastic praise. The following week, she submits her assignment precisely on time again. On the surface, it seems incredibly simple, right? But it actually begs a really profound central question. Did the praise actually cause the behavior to become more likely? Are our choices truly our own, or are they mathematically shaped by the reactions of the world around us?
Well, to answer that, we've got to look at B.F. Skinner. He was one of the most influential and honestly widely discussed 20th century behaviorists. He championed this brilliant concept called operant conditioning. Skinner argued that our actions aren't just automatic biological reflexes. Instead, they are continuously shaped by environmental consequences. In other words, what happens immediately after you do something totally dictates whether you'll ever do it again. So it breaks down into a really elegant fundamental equation. First, an individual emits an action. That's the behavior. Second, that behavior produces a specific consequence in the real world. And third, that consequence directly influences the likelihood of that exact future behavior. It's this continuous, dynamic loop. We aren't just reacting blindly, we are constantly operating on our environment, and the environment is operating right back on us, fine-tuning our actions day by day.
To really prove this, let's step into the cinematic, slightly moody laboratory environment of the famous Skinner box. You see, Skinner didn't just theorize from behind a desk. He built an operant conditioning chamber to isolate exact, measurable behaviors. This apparatus was a heavily controlled microworld. It contained just a lever, a food tray, and a precise mechanism for delivering food pellets. It was right here, in this quiet, sterile space, that foundational animal research was translated into universal, undeniable laws of learning.
Picture a rat placed inside this box. Initially, it just explores, sniffing the corners, wandering around without much purpose. Eventually, entirely by chance, it accidentally presses the lever. Click. A food pellet is delivered. The rat eats. It wanders again, bumps the lever again. Click. Another pellet. With repeated, consistent experience, that accidental lever pressing becomes deliberate and highly frequent. The rat has learned. The behavior was mathematically strengthened by its consequence.
This brings us to the absolute beating heart of Skinner's entire theory: reinforcement. A reinforcer is literally any consequence that increases the likelihood of a behavior occurring again. If you want to see an action repeated, whether you're training a rat to press a lever or encouraging a student to focus on their reading, you absolutely must utilize reinforcement. It is the fuel that drives repeated behavior.
Now, reinforcement actually comes in two distinct flavors. First, we have positive reinforcement. This is when you provide a desirable consequence after a behavior. Think back to our student. She gets positive reinforcement when she actively participates in class and the teacher praises her. A reward is added. Second, there's negative reinforcement. This is when you remove an unpleasant stimulus. For example, if she completes her homework on time, maybe she's allowed to avoid an unpleasant additional classroom chore. Both of these scenarios, whether you're adding a reward or removing an annoyance, result in an increase in the desired behavior.
Okay, we need to make an absolutely crucial distinction here, one that people get wrong all the time. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative reinforcement always aims to increase a behavior by taking away something annoying, painful, or stressful. Punishment, on the other hand, is specifically designed to decrease a behavior. You do that either by introducing an unpleasant consequence, like giving a student detention, or by removing something desirable, like taking away their phone. Reinforcement always builds up and encourages an action. Punishment always tears down and discourages it.
And you know, Skinner was actually highly critical of punishment, mostly because it often completely fails to produce permanent behavioral change. Sure, it suppresses the behavior temporarily while the authority figure is hovering nearby, but it doesn't teach the subject what they should be doing instead. Plus, it can produce some really unintended, deeply negative side effects like fear, resentment, or sneaky behavior. Because of these severe limitations, Skinner forcefully argued that reinforcement is always the preferred and, frankly, the much more effective method for true lasting behavior modification.
But wait, how do you reinforce a behavior if the subject doesn't even know how to do it yet? A rat doesn't naturally know how to run a complex obstacle course, and a student doesn't naturally know how to sit and study intensely for 3 hours straight. Since complex behaviors don't just magically appear all at once, we use a process called shaping. Shaping involves reinforcing successive, smaller steps toward that ultimate complex goal, essentially rewarding the journey along the way.
Let's bring it back to our hardworking student. Say she wants to build a rigorous daily study habit. She doesn't start with a grueling marathon session that'll just lead to burnout. Step 1, she sets a remarkably small target, like just studying for 5 minutes. Step 2, she gets a satisfying consequence, maybe checking off a progress tracker or getting a small, tangible reward. By consistently reinforcing these tiny successes, Step 3 is effortlessly achieved. She gradually shapes a highly complex, 1-hour daily study routine over time without ever feeling overwhelmed.
Now, once a behavior is locked in, you actually don't need to reward it every single time. This introduces us to the fascinating world of reinforcement schedules. Continuous reinforcement is great for starting out, but intermittent schedules, rewarding only some of the time, are vastly more powerful for maintaining behavior long-term. The absolute most potent of these is the variable ratio schedule, where reinforcement comes after an unpredictable number of responses. It's exactly why compulsive phone behavior is so incredibly hard to break. You never know which swipe or which notification is going to deliver that satisfying rush of a reward, so you just keep checking, over and over again.
So what about bad habits? If punishment is flawed, what do we turn to? Well, we use a process called extinction. Extinction is what happens when a previously reinforced behavior gradually decreases entirely because it's simply no longer being reinforced. If a student repeatedly makes irrelevant, loud comments simply to get attention, consistently removing that attention, literally just totally ignoring the disruption, causes the behavior to gradually die out through extinction. You're just cutting off the fuel supply.
A smart teacher can brilliantly use this entire toolkit to totally transform an environment. Imagine a classroom case where things are chaotic. First, the teacher clearly defines the behavioral goals, things like timely homework and active participation. Then, they identify and systematically provide reinforcers, like points or rewards, for those good behaviors. For minor disruptions, they use extinction, simply withholding the attention the student is desperately seeking. Throughout the whole process, they monitor, evaluate, and modify the strategy. It takes the emotion out of discipline and replaces it with predictable mechanics. It's a precise, scientific approach.
And Skinner's radical behaviorism expanded way beyond simple classroom management. His theories deeply influenced the structure of modern society. He championed programmed learning and structured teaching machines that provided immediate, perfectly timed feedback long before modern computers even existed. His foundational work is the bedrock of token economies used in institutions around the world, personalized learning modules in education today, and widespread, highly effective organizational behavior therapy.
But hey, no theory is entirely bulletproof, right? Critics correctly argue that we are far more complex than rats in a box. Pure observable behavior struggles to fully explain the deep, messy intricacies of human cognition. For instance, renowned psycholinguists strongly criticize Skinner's attempt to explain the vast, generative complexities of human language through simple reinforcement. Furthermore, pure behaviorism completely ignores internal meaning, thought processes, and the very concept of free will, treating humans purely as products of their environmental history.
It's also important to remember that Skinner didn't invent this out of thin air. Looking at the grander scheme of psychology, we can see how this evolved. We started with Edward Thorndike noticing that satisfying consequences strengthen responses. Then, Ivan Pavlov famously proved stimulus associations with his dogs. Next, Edwin Guthrie emphasized the importance of immediate stimulus-response contiguity. Skinner took all of these incredible insights and built the definitive, highly systematic theory of operant conditioning that we still heavily rely on today.
We've seen how exceptionally powerful behaviorism is. If you control the consequences, you can often control the actions. But as we wrap up this explainer, we've got to look at the blind spots. We have to ask where the rigid mechanics of operant conditioning fall short when dealing with deeper, more complex psychological needs. Can absolutely everything we do really be boiled down to a point system, a gold star, or a food belling?
Seriously, think about it. What about behaviors that involve emotional needs, deep attachment, and social relationships? What if an infant seeks something far more fundamental than a mere reward for an action? What if they inherently seek comfort and contact?
This beautifully sets the stage for our next analysis, where we will leave the sterile mechanical Skinner box behind and explore Harlow, learning, attachment, and the undeniable human need for comfort.